I see one other member has joined. Let's go ahead and get started, and it's just going to be a few of us, but it's going to be a good program, and we'll talk about whether you know we can invite Stan back, and I know he's very flexible. But let's go ahead with the program. As is our tradition, we introduce ourselves real quick because we usually have a small group, usually between 10 and 12, 13 people, and then I'll introduce the speaker and we'll go from there. So let's start with Lori Martin, who I see has joined. Lori, can you hear us?
You're muted if you can.
I retired about 5 years ago. I'm from the Chicago area, and
Okay.
so I did both public sector and consulting, private consulting, for a number of years in the Chicago area. And one of the things that concerns me, which I don't think was unique to our area, was probably about 10, maybe 15 years ago, I was doing a couple of short-term consulting assignments in a community called Carpentersville, which is northwest of downtown Chicago. And it was shortly after the housing recession, which was 2008, 2009. And large companies were coming into the town and buying up single-family homes and then renting them. And they were not necessarily maintaining the housing as well as they should. And the longer term concern I had was how they were going to manipulate the housing market, because between some of these larger firms in some neighborhoods, they had bought up, a huge amount of property. So I don't know if anyone's experienced that, but it was
Everywhere.
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Everywhere is doing that. And what's unfortunate is that, right now we're starting to see a higher vacancy rate in the rental stock. And of course, they just care about return on the asset. So as soon as that asset stops returning money to them, we start seeing higher vacancy rates. They're just going to dump a ton of product on the market. So
Right.
to your point about manipulating the housing market, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I forget where I read this, but if there's no incentive to maintain the house, then um, good luck if you don't own it. I mean,
Sure.
Yeah.
that's a problem.
Steve, why don't
So,
you introduce yourself?
yeah, sure. I'm Steve Tocknell. I am the past chair of the APA Private Practice Division. We initiated these conversations uh, as part of the virtual conference in 2020 as a happy hour type of event, and sort of evolved over the last 5 or 6 years to where we have a topic, but we still like to save a lot of time for networking and crosstalk, if you will. So I'm very pleased that we're up to a full 12 conversations a month. It was a lot more random when we got started, but Vince is taking command here as the professional development chair. So we're having one every month, and we have we make the recordings and a summary available in our monthly newsletter. And I think there's even a YouTube channel that the communications chair maintains with the conversations on it. So there's a lot of secondary benefits from the conversation. And I can always get a lot out of them just because I remember Lori from the last time she was on a conversation. It's been a couple of years though, hasn't it, Lori?
Yeah, the programs have all been good. I've looked at them and sometimes I have a conflict or whatever, but I think that
Mhm.
the committee has done an excellent job with the topics.
Yeah, we're getting a little pushy on behalf of planners in private practice, and I'm very proud of that. So,
Wow. Yeah. Thanks
so
for the opportunity.
that leaves you, Vince.
Yeah, well, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do this, and um, I really enjoyed it. Vince Cotero, as Steve said, I've been serving for a little over a year as the professional development chair. I'm a planner, sole proprietor. I'm semi-retired. Um, I specialize in land use and expert witness testimony and zoning. I operate under the fictitious name of City Logic, based in Cape Coral, Florida. So I'm just going to get right into it and introduce our speaker, who I've known for quite a while now, probably over 40 years. Stan Fitterman is the president of SFF Consulting Group, and he's a housing and community development consultant with over 30 years experience. His specialty is affordable housing development, which includes permanent supportive housing, disaster recovery, as well as local and federal housing policies and programs. He's a subcontractor for HUD as a national technical assistance provider. And in addition to his work with HUD grantees, his clients include state and local governments throughout the country, as well as nonprofit developers of affordable housing. Stan has a Master of City Planning degree from Georgia Tech. And full disclosure, I just want to tell you, I know Stan for a long time. We will work together in Citrus County. I can't remember, Stan, don't get old, if it was the late 80s or early 90s. I was at an APA conference, and Steve or Laura, you can correct me, but APA used to have a room where they allowed prospective employers to interview candidates.
Yeah.
And they would bring their resumes with them, and we're sending them in advance and everything. So Stan was on the list one day. We interviewed him, and he was able to come to work for us in Citrus County, Florida, about an hour north of Tampa, which is where Stan's based. I forgot to say that. And we hired him as a transportation planner. And he worked on all the housing programs, too, which were in another department. And I got the phone call one day from the county administrator, which I fully expected I was going to get, because Stan had worked on housing very well and very efficiently. And he called me up and he said, I'm creating a housing division in your department. And we were called, I don't know, planning and development or development services, something like that back then. And I said, oh, that's great. And he said, and I'm hiring Stan as the first manager. And I said, I knew that was coming. So Stan took that job and never looked back. And here we are more than 35, 40 years later.
Yeah.
So I'll turn it over to you, Stan.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. I'll go ahead and share this. And obviously, as small a group as we are, please interrupt with questions or anything you want to ask about, talk about while we're on our way. Let's see here. Trying to get the slideshow. There we go. Okay. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today is converting a lot of times underutilized hotels, but other structures and turning it into affordable rental housing. Converting motels to housing started to become a thing during COVID. We had, as everyone remembers, we had no idea how it was spreading. We're pretty sure it was through the air. We had homeless people were in congregate shelters. So there were one huge room with a bunch of cots, and there was a lot of effort to try and figure out how are we going to not keep people from getting sick. And at the same time, people weren't traveling. So motels were starting to struggle, especially the smaller motels, roadside 35, 40 units. So it started out as the public sector taking housing money and renting rooms in hotels, trying to keep the hotels going. They noticed as they were doing that people started to have an uptake of services that were being offered. And if you think about it, if one is living on the street, one has to worry about where they're going to sleep. One has to worry about getting attacked, getting arrested for using the bathroom, how you're going to keep your stuff from getting stolen. And drugs and alcohol can make that be not as bad. And so it's real hard with folks when they're on the street to be able to focus on their demons and deal with their substance abuse, deal with their mental illness. A lot of times it's both. And what people have noticed during this is that when people got into housing where they didn't have to worry about all those other things of sleeping outdoors, that they started realizing they had the bandwidth to start dealing with their demons. And so they started to be an uptake of services. That, and as time went on, California especially, and King County, Washington, started moving funding toward the acquisition of hotels to be used as permanent housing. Now, California started a home key program. They used some of that ARPA money that came out of Congress in whenever it was, 2020. And they took $1 billion and they to be used for converting hotels or acquisition and converting of hotels to permanent housing. What they did two things to make this successful. One is they made it exempt from the California Environmental Equality Act, which some of you probably know that just became a NIMBY tool. It really wasn't. It kind of devolved into if someone was opening a shopping center across the street from your shopping center, you'd say, oh, they violated CEQA, and it would hold it up for 18 months. So they made these acquisitions exempt from CEQA to kind of stop the NIMBY. The second thing they did is the local governments had to be the applicant with a nonprofit partner. So you had a nonprofit partner that could do the development side and manage the property and provide the services, but the local government was the lead applicant because in their mind, and it worked out this way, local governments weren't going to apply if they weren't going to have the zoning and the land use regs already in place. So these were already projects were already approved. So as soon as the application was approved, they could buy it and convert it into housing. To date, they've done about 16,000 units, 200, almost 260 developments. It's got some issues with it. They provided 5 years of operating. They now realize they should have done a lot more than 5 years worth of operating for these projects. So they've got a Home Key Plus now where they're addressing some of these issues. But overall, this is kind of the first time there had been a consolidated effort to fund the acquisition of vacant buildings, underutilized buildings, and convert it to affordable housing. All right, some of the advantages should be a faster turnaround. I mean, the losers are the acquisitions already there, certainly much faster than doing new construction. It was cheaper. The Home Key average unit in California, about 150 grand, cost 4.25 to build new construction. So it was much less expensive. There were amenities on site. There was already an office there, so that could be used as a leasing office or a place to provide services. There are some that I worked with in California. I had a contract with the state house HCD to work with their applicants who were applying. And one of the ones I worked with took the restaurant space and turned it into a common kitchen. So they didn't put individual restaurant kitchens in individual units. They had a common kitchen with several stoves and refrigerators for people to use. It's a non-congregate setting. So much better for people's self-esteem to be in a non-congregate setting. They have their own place. They can keep their stuff there. They don't have to worry about somebody stealing their things. They have a place to take a shower, a place to use the bathroom. So it's much more dignity out of having a non-congregate shelter than a congregate shelter. And as I said before, there was a higher uptake of services. So they're all voluntary in these things, and people were more willing when they're in the non-congregate setting to take advantage of the substance abuse counseling, the mental health counseling, the case management that was offered, as opposed to when they're in a congregate setting and have to leave every night. There are also hurdles to this. The areas where hotels are may not permit residential by right. Change of use often can trigger compliance with new codes. It adds cost. It adds time. We're going to talk about one that I worked on in Florida to kind of walk you through what we had to go through to get it from hotel use to housing in just a second here. So this was in Kissimmee, Florida, which if you're familiar with Florida, it is, I know two of you are, Kissimmee's where Disney is, Osceola County's where Disney is. It had a lot of roadside motels as an offshoot of Disney. In the 90-ish era, around the 90s, Disney decided they were going to capture every tourist dollar that came to Central Florida. And so what they started doing was offering packages where you got tickets, parking, and motel all in one bundle. And in order to encourage people to do that, when they listed out the prices, if you bought the bundle, hotel rooms were ridiculously cheap, like $40 and $45 a night, $50 a night. Now they were making up for it, of course, with parking, with with the park tickets, with all the food you buy at the park. So they weren't hurting. They weren't giving the hotels away. But what it did is it made the roadside motels that had been built near Disney and on Highway 192 in Kissimmee mostly vacant. People were not staying in those hotels anymore. They could stay on property for Disney for less. In addition, we had a service sector economy there. It was very low wage. And we had a suburban style zoning, so there was very limited land with density. As a result, those existing motels became de facto housing for people who couldn't afford housing anywhere else. And by 2 years ago, when I started working on this project, households were paying the equivalent of $1,400 a month for a hotel room, for a not very nice hotel room, a rundown hotel room. So one of my clients decided they were going to buy what was called the Crown Hotel, 32-room hotel built in 1980. 1980 is important because it was after lead-based paint, so they didn't have to worry about people living with lead-based paint. It needed minimum rehab. The existing zone had permitted residential by right. But because it was a change of use, we had to meet all the new codes. So we closed on acquisition on September of 2023. We had 100% of the financing in place. We were ready to go. It took us almost 2 years to get to construction, start of construction. And so the plan was acquisition, minor rehab, provide residents with a lease, and offer services. It was the provide residents with the lease that caused it to be the change of use. If we had just said, we're going to run this as a hotel, we're not going to do anything to it, run it as a hotel, not give people a lease, and charge them by the week, no problem. We could have done that. But because we were converting it to housing with a lease, and we wanted leases because we wanted to be able to house people who had vouchers, then it became a change of use, residential. We had to meet all the codes. So parking, we needed a variance because it had 32 spaces and they called 1.5 spaces per residential. So we were short on parking. This is a population that our tenants don't have cars for the most part. Our parking study showed we needed about 15 spaces. So we needed half what was already there. And I know when I was applying, I was like, oh yeah, just get a variance. Forgetting the fact that variances take time and money. So it took time, it took a parking study, it took time and money to get the variance for parking. Same thing happened with the size. The city required 500 square foot minimum size for residential. These weren't that big. So we had to do a variance in order to be able to meet the minimum size requirement. Other things that came up. This is on 192 in Kissimmee, so it's a state road, state highway, 4-lane state highway. Kissimmee decided they wanted to have 12-foot wide sidewalks because that would make everything walkable. So the existing sidewalks on the road for 6 feet. We were the first one to come in under this. So they wanted us to widen the sidewalk by 6 feet, which was going to take away parking from us, which was going to be have the sidewalk right up against the office. And the way we talked them out of that is, one, it was going to look ridiculous, right? 6-foot sidewalk, 12-foot sidewalk, 6-foot sidewalk. But I think the tipping point for us was being able to say, people who can't live here are going to be sleeping on the sidewalk because there's just plenty of room for them to sleep. That triggered it. So we got the exemption from that. We had to have sprinklers to each room, which I personally struggle with. I understand fire code's argument all the time. If it was your family, you'd want a sprinkler. I get it. But when it was a hotel, there was no sprinklers. And it was every door open to the outside, and there was an hour-rated firewall between each unit. Still had to sprinkle it. So money and time to get that designed and get it installed. We had fire suppression that we were going to put over the cooktops already, but we had to have a fire alarm separate from the suppression over the cooktops. We had to have full-size refrigerators, but there wasn't a definition in the code of what full size meant. So that was a 3 or 4 week argument over what meant full size. And it was also a struggle to find ones that they were going to be affordable that met their definition of full size. Some of the other more frustrating things that I found, one was we had to do individual water meters, and they also required individual electric meters. The electric company, both were owned by the city. They were both city-owned utilities. Their argument was that in other hotels that had de facto homeless become de facto housing, the owners of the hotels were not paying their water or their electric bills, and they would not pay it for months and months and months. They'd get to be 100,000 to, whatever, 50, $60,000. And then the city had to force everybody to move because they had to cut off water and sewer, because water and electric, because the owner wasn't paid. So their solution, their knee-jerk solution, was individual meters. Now, we offered to put a $100,000 deposit down, 50 for water, 50 for electric, which would have been about a year's worth of usage, because it was costing us $350,000 to do individual meters. In addition, there's I learned more about hotels than I needed, construction, than I've ever thought I needed to know. But they had a chaseway in one of the areas in the building on the second floor where all the telephone and all the electric went. There was barely enough room to run the electric wires. So we almost functionally couldn't do it by not having enough room to run the wires through the chaseway to get them to every room. So it was almost impossible to do it. We were able to pull it off, but it was difficult. And then there were some of the arguments that we've all gone through with city staff when we've been consultants. One staff person said they preferred the concrete be removed completely to decommission the pool. Code said you had to break it up. We said, we're going to follow code. So that was another fight that we were successful. We prevailed on it, but we also made the staff person mad. So it made the relationship for the rest of the site approval difficult. And the other thing, and y'all can, as consultants can appreciate this, was trying to keep my client on task because there was so much back and forth. So the city would review the plans. They would come back with things that they wanted redone. We would redo them. And then in the next round, they'd have unrelated issues they had found that they had missed in their first review. So Vince, I don't know, you did land use your entire career. Was that a problem where you were? Was there a lot of bites was there a lot of back and forth?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Why? Yeah.
Always and every community I worked, the development community would complain about that. And there were elected officials that would tell the county administrator or county manager or city, wherever I worked, tell the staff that if they miss something on the first, they can't go back the second. The attorney said that's not legal. You have an obligation to go back. So, what I tried to do in my position as director was finesse that a little bit and say, is that something that you don't need to comment on and you can approve the plan conditionally and catch it later on the inspection? And that was one way to soften the blow a little bit. But it still is a problem. And then, like I said before that, it says here, preferred that the concrete be removed. They wanted it removed, but break it up was the rule. Yeah. You make a staff member upset. They could just nitpick you on for the next 2 or 3 submittals or projects. And it's unfortunately.
Yeah. And their architect learned that the hard way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the civil engineer. Yeah. Yeah, so that was a very frustrating part of the process, was a lot of the back and forth that were things that we thought, okay, fix this and we'll approve it. Then come back, oh no, we found something else we didn't like. And so so keeping my client on task and having her not go nuts was also a challenge.
They didn't like your client. I mean, that to me is the beginning and the end of it, as far as the red tape and what do you call it? Petty gripes on this idea that the city staff was mad at you is as a factor that you'd put in a presentation is shameful. But I think that if you were saying that you were building something that was going to add $1 million a unit to the tax base, they might have been a little more cooperative.
I think perhaps, but also this is a city that has huge problem with homeless, and they've been working, and the city itself had bought another with ARPA money, the American Rescue Program. They bought their own hotel. So the city was recognizing the need for the homeless, but to your point, that didn't get to the planners. They weren't as concerned about that. That wasn't his concern. While it was elected officials' concern and the housing department's concern, the planning staff didn't seem to share that concern. So I think to your point, you're correct. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the maybe this is a digression, but the private practice division is pushing on behalf of all professional planners to have better time management skills, if you will. I mean, the things they don't teach in planning school about, budgeting, scheduling, staffing, and things like that, that seem to be beneath the dignity of a lot of planners, and that's a problem that the profession has to confront.
Yeah. So I guess the good news is they finished. So it's open. It opened in April. This was the ribbon cutting. There's the sign. They have a mural that was painted by a local artist. The rooms, they look like nice hotel rooms. And they have a refrigerator, a cooktop, and a microwave. They have a sprinkler, fire suppression. 32 units are total. 23 of them have vouchers from the Continuum of Care program, which is where a lot of the homeless programs are run through, and where people who are homeless register to coordinate interest services. So they've got, in that case, 23 of the people are paying 30% of their income for rent. The remaining 9 units are renting for $9.22 a month. You may recall, market rate for a hotel room there for a rundown hotel room was around $1,400. So we've got folks that are the remaining 9 units for people that can afford to pay $9.22 a month. They've got case management, mental health counseling, substance abuse counseling for those that need it. So the happy ending is it was successful, up and running. The other thing I wanted to cover is some of the pushback that I'm starting to see around the country on some of the land use regulations. Oregon, local governments have to approve a conversion of a hotel or a motel to an emergency shelter or affordable housing, regardless of what their zoning laws are. So state law is overriding local land use laws on this and telling local governments, if someone is converting a hotel or motel to affordable housing, you have to approve it. Florida. So we got Oregon, we're a little bit left of center on the political scale. Florida, other end of the spectrum, right? Our legislature is extremely conservative, almost libertarian. In Florida, they issue, many of you, 2/3 of y'all know, that local governments have to approve multifamily and mixed-use residential developments. They get to bypass local zoning restrictions if provided the project is in commercial, industrial, or mixed-use zonings, and it meets the state's affordability criteria, which is basically targeted to folks making 120% of median. And so some of my developer clients are looking for land in those zoning districts so that they can bypass local zoning. California, again, more liberal legislature, but they extended that CEQA exemption for projects that convert motels or hotels to housing. They permanently made it permanent, the exemption from CEQA, from their Environmental Quality Act. And they keep introduced several times. They've introduced bills similar to Oregon that would override local zoning. They haven't gotten it passed yet, but they've got closer every time. So it seems like that also is becoming a little bit of a thing. So I guess I just wanted to bring this up because, having gone through the process and seeing some states starting to push back on local land use regs, it does make me wonder about how far that will go. I also wonder, as I was thinking about this while preparing for this, when places have gotten rid of zoning, Houston, of course, they went to deed restrictions. And rich people are always going to try and figure out a way to keep low-income people or people of color out of their neighborhoods. And so if there's more state pushback against land use regs than these 3, started to wonder, well, what's going to come next? Are we going to be like Houston, and everyone's going to be asked to, local governments will be asked to implement deed restrict or enforce deed restrictions? And how far will it go? The other thing, I don't know if y'all, my two Florida colleagues, if y'all have followed it, but there was a case in Tampa where the city approved a hotel in on an area called Harbor Island, which is right near downtown, and it's gated communities. The gated community residents went nuts. They sued, and they got the judge it was assigned to was basically, in her opinion, approving that the development was done correctly and it should go forward. Noted in her decision, I don't even know why local governments think they're allowed to tell people what they can do on their own land. And so she called into question whether or not zoning itself was legal, was constitutional. And I think, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were written that off as a fringe, but she's a Federalist Society affiliated judge. We're getting a lot more judges that are affiliated with that line of thinking. And so the city appealed that part, saying they did not have the I think she said they don't have the quasi judicial ability to do things quasi-judicially. It's now going to an appeals court, and since it was heard on the lower court, the same judge has now been appointed to the appeals court. So we've got at least one vote on the appeals court. He's probably going to say the city doesn't have the authority to be quasi-judicial. But it's just an interesting dynamic of having watched zoning progress over the last 30 years. Now we've got pushback on zoning as to whether or not it's constitutional. And then the last thing I just wanted to show is I was a developer. I did a sabbatical for 3 years as a developer. I was a consultant most of my work for local government, thanks to Vince, for about 10 years, and then did a sabbatical and was a consultant, went to work for a statewide nonprofit that was basically a housing consultant, affordable housing consultant, went to work for a national consultant for a few years, and then took a sabbatical and was a developer for 3 years. And during that time, did about 1,000 units of rental housing and participated in a project that the state of Florida, a pilot project the state of Florida funded, where they had us, my employer who I worked with, a nonprofit I worked with, Catholic Charities, and a group in Miami. And they funded us to do about 50 units of affordable, straight up rental housing. But in order to get the funds, we had to agree to house the people in the coordinated entry system, folks that were homeless, that were the highest users of services. So we had to have people who got into the emergency room the most, went to the hospital, overnight stays the most, got arrested the most, got spit in jail the most. So we had folks that were struggling, right? We put them into housing, and then we had some academic types track of them every year for 3 years to see how they did. Now, before I go into the results, I can tell you that managing 50 units of people who all have serious problems was not easy. It was probably not a great idea. Our model had been 50% would be folks that were homeless, 50% that weren't. That worked a lot better from a management standpoint. We finally figured out what we had to do. One thing I did learn, though, was that if two people hated each other when they were on the street, they also hated each other when they were neighbors. So that didn't work well. Fortunately, we had the ability to move some people around into other developments we had. But the results that we got was that hospital visits in the first year dropped 61%. We had people on Medicaid. They were able to see a doctor. They didn't wait till things were a crisis. Hospital costs dropped 63%. Emergency room visits dropped almost 75% from before when they were on the street. Arrest down 78%. Days spent in jail down 89%. And it is. I had to do these presentations around the state about this program, and I was in Daytona Beach area, Florida, and some guy who worked for county said, "Well, you only saved $83,000. We spend millions on jail. You barely saved us any money." I was like, "Dude, it was 50 units, number one, and it was 1 year. But second of all, I, by accident of birth and luck, have never had to be in jail, but I've watched enough Orange is the New Black to know it doesn't look fun. And it does mess with people. And I have a colleague that runs a reentry nonprofit in Florida, and he says he likes to remind people that it doesn't matter if you're in jail for a night or for 10 years, it messes with you. It has an effect on you. And so getting people to not be, there's also the people side of this. And I had this opportunity. There's a marketing organization uh, association that has you have to have at least $1 million as a marketing budget to be a member. And they were in St. Pete for their conference at the Vinoy or one of those high-end hotels. And what they do is that they'll pick a couple of nonprofits who, if you have a problem, a marketing problem, you can go there and you get an hour with these marketing professionals who are marketing professionals with Coke, Marriott, Pepsi, that level of marketing. And so we went and we got invited and we talked about this and about how we're not getting much traction. We're saving people a lot. These communities, this will save people money, but people are still not that excited about having permanent supportive housing. They already have the homeless. They want them off the street. This could be a way to address this, and it's proving that it works. And the marketing guy said, "You don't have any emotion here. You're just talking about money. You're just talking about cash. You've got people that no longer are sleeping on the street. Why aren't you using the emotional side of this?" So it's like, yeah, he probably had a point. People were not having to spend to people. These were real people with, real issues who didn't have to spend as many nights in the hospital, many nights going to the ER, didn't have to spend as many nights in the jail. And just the last thing, the pre-housing cost of 58 participants in year one, $5 million. Year two, including the cost of the housing we built, 2.4 million. So contrary to his point where I should be ending on the emotional side of this, having folks that are housed does end up saving us not only them on the emotional side, but also ends up not as many nights in jail, not as many nights in prison, as in the emergency room, not as many nights in hospitals.
Yeah, you could get some good testimony from people. Think of it as a revival service. You want people to come up and testify. And I'm serious.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's I think there is, obviously not. Well, I have two thoughts on this. One is that we're definitely creaming of folks who have decided, the folks who will apply for this housing and sign a lease. They're folks that have decided that they're ready to get better. So we're not. It's not going to work for everybody. There are people who are not ready to get better, and they're in their addiction and they're not ready to quit. And so I think that also, and I think it's also, we need to not, overestimate the effectiveness of this. This works for a middle of the bell curve of our homeless population. There's always going to be people who aren't going to be as successful. And there are people who move into permanent supportive housing who aren't as successful. And when I was doing a lot of work with the Home Key program in California, we had to structure an eviction system, because if you're in a regular affordable housing unit, low income housing tax credit, regular rental housing, you mess up, you're out. And if you're disruptive, if you're breaking rules, they'll evict you. In permanent supportive housing, you get a couple of bites at the apple. You start with the case manager and you try and encourage people to do the right thing. One that I worked with, we had to have them come into the office every morning so people could watch them take their medication. It was like, you either have to take your mental health drugs, or because when you don't take them, you threaten to kill people. So you're going to come, if you want to continue to live here, you're going to come in the office and someone's going to watch you take your meds every morning. So it's absolutely not accurate to say, oh, this is going to be the be all end all and we'll get rid of homelessness and everything will be great. But it does work for a large segment of the homeless population, the chronically homeless, the folks who have disabilities, the ones we see on the streets, as opposed to the ones who just can't afford a place to live.
It's inspiring.
Well, thank you.
I'm serious. I'll grant you that a lot of homeless people would prefer to remain homeless, but
Mm.
there are people who are, working for Walmart and living in their
Yeah.
cars. I mean,
Without a doubt, yes. And there's, I mean, and for the folks that the ones we see, the ones who have the mental health and the substance abuse issues, yeah, some of them are not ready at all. Some of them are ready to not be homeless, and then some. Like I've done some of those, the homeless counts, the point in time counts. We get up at 3 in the morning and walk around as people are waking up, and you have a clipboard. You ask them, "Hey, how'd you get here?" And it's just doing the count of how many homeless there are. And
Mhm.
there's like I remember one guy, I was doing it in Jacksonville, and one guy's like, "Yeah, I wrecked my car. I was on my way to work and moved here for a construction job, wrecked my car. I couldn't afford to get it fixed, and I lost my job because I couldn't get to work. No family that could send him money. Yet,
Yeah.
he didn't want to be there, but he didn't have a choice.
Mhm.
He
well,
didn't
I
feel like he
mean,
had a choice.
I was in California. God, I guess it's like 8 years ago now, but you could just we drove down from Half Moon Bay to Santa Cruz, a nice
Mhm.
place, and any side street, relatively quiet thoroughfare was just lined with RVs because
Mhm.
that's all anyone can afford, and they're not necessarily in need of counseling or
They just need a place,
crisis
right?
management. They just
Yeah.
can't afford to live anywhere else.
Right. And
Mhm.
that's 85% of the folks that are at home we classify as homeless. They're folks that just that can't afford to find a place to live. Kissimmee, where this is, it's, the not much density, not much rental housing. You got people who can afford to pay $1,400 a month and all they can find is a hotel room.
Well, let me ask you a private practice
Mhm.
question. We've had earlier discussions. I'm thinking mainly about Owen, Vince, where he said that, doing mixed use developments requires a certain level of expertise that most developers don't have, to put it that way. Or they may be very strong in one aspect of it, like retail, but they're all thumbs when it comes to housing. And increasing density doesn't necessarily reduce the cost per unit because it's more complex to do density. So if the, is there, what would, is there a role for non-subsidized affordable housing from the perspective of what you've been doing? Or do you have
Uh,
to have some kind of a sponsor or benefactor?
I think previously I would have said yes. I'm not as sure anymore. I see general contractors wanting to focus on much higher end development and doing the million, $2 million plus. They make a much more, they can sell them and they make a much higher fee. I'm not seeing, I'm not seeing general contractors wanting to focus on the entry level market like I did when I started working for Vince. When, there were
Mhm.
several, Vince, you remember, there were several, when we were in Citrus, there were several
Yeah.
GCs who were working on entry level homes. And those, I don't see that nearly as much anymore. So I
That's
think
right.
that's a challenge. Um, and so I also wonder, Montgomery County, Maryland is kind of the poster child, but people are starting to move toward the inclusionary zoning and requiring a certain percentage to be affordable without subsidy, and doing that by saying we'll let you have extra density, or we'll let you have build 10 extra homes if you build five of them that are affordable. So I don't know. I guess if I had the answer, I'd be talking to you from my yacht, but it does. It certainly seems that subsidy is going to continue to play a role for a while, and that it's going to be more of a nonprofit driven market than,
Mhm.
especially on the ownership. On the rental side, the with affordable rental development, it's a developer fee play. So you've got in Florida especially, we've got a lot of Illinois as well. We've got a lot of for-profit developers that are doing this because they're doing a $20 million deal and getting a 16% developer fee. They're making $3 million. So that's their motivation for doing it. but they can't do it without without the tax credit subsidy.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, my, what do you call it? Cocktail party observation is that if you can if you can sell 10 houses for $1 million apiece, why on earth would you build 40 houses for $250,000?
Exactly. And remember your developer fee is pretty much your spread, and in that case, it's a spread. Not only, they're making a developer fee of 10%, so 100 grand on the developer fee, but they're also making private sector developers will only build where there's a spread between total development cost and appraised value. So they're adding in 100 grand just into the cost as their overhead cost and profit. And then they're also selling it for higher than total development cost. So they may be building it for 750. They can sell it for $1 million. Why should, to your point, why should they build at 250 and make 25,000 a house when they can build at $1 million and make 300,000? So
Yeah,
as long
it's
as they can
more,
sell them, that's where they're gonna gravitate to.
yeah. I mean, the same thing with cars. I mean, you can't get a sedan anymore.
No,
So
no, no.
it's income inequality. To
Yeah.
me, is the enemy of us all. That there's a concentration of wealth. And now I'm starting to sound like a preacher. So I gotta stop that. That was my nickname in grad school, by the way. They threw it at me. Anytime I got too carried away and started yelling for 10 minutes, they just said, "Shut up, preacher." So here I am. But anyway, fascinating. And I'm glad to know that, I mean, after you went through all of the heartache with the um, staff people, bringing up new um, aggravations, I was not prepared for the happy ending, but it's great to see. And
Well, good.
I'm familiar. I've read stories about some of those places in Kissimmee that are,
Yeah.
they're really um, disappointing, especially in the sense that, those were supposed to be places where people go on vacation and then people
Yeah.
end up getting stuck there. That's kind of sad.
Yeah.
So, and again, you've got this Disney monster out there that tends to devour all of us, I think. So
Yeah.
Mm.
that's too bad. Well, anyway, it's the happiest place on earth, right? So,
That's what I've heard.
well,
Right.
and I'm really more of a Tennessean than a Floridian, even after living here for 20 years and starting my career here. But Tennessee has some good stuff going for it, but
You
Nashville is
got you
just
got Dollywood.
out of here. I just can't I can't believe that Nashville has become so hard to find an
Place to live.
ordinary
Yeah.
house. Anyway, that's my
I,
rant. I'll start. But thank you, Stan. And I'm sorry we didn't get more people, but we will. This will be written up and we'll have it on YouTube. And like Lori said, there's a lot of follow on with these conversations that people have. So, Vince, thanks for setting us up, and I'll let you close us out.
Yeah, appreciate it and echo with what Steve said. Lori, do you have any questions? Because I just had one I want to.
Yeah, I have a question for Stan. In
Sure.
retrospect, would it have been better rather than the series of variances that you had to deal with because of staff, to try and actually do a zoning amendment for this particular use so that the text of the zoning ordinance would recognize that this was a different type of use and some of the standards which would apply to other uses just were not relevant?
Boy, Lori, that's a great question.
Part of the challenge with one was I don't think anyone thought it was going to be as difficult as it ended up being. So and I think I'm not sure that also that we would have been successful with getting a zoning amendment as well. And
Okay.
one of the other challenges that I failed to mention was that the nonprofit borrowed money for the acquisition, a portion of the $1 million from a community development financial institution. So they were making, and they had an interest reserve to get them through to construction when they would be able to start making payments on it, because you borrow the money when you don't have any cash flow for rental housing, so you capitalize an interest reserve. And so I think the timing, I think that initially it was felt that there would be faster to not do that, to not try and address anything in the code, and to instead, we didn't know there was going to be so much back and forth, and especially with the utilities, city-owned utilities requiring the individual meters. That was also very slow. And one thing I learned is you can't go to Home Depot and buy electric meters. They are demand response. So you have to order them, and then they make them when you order them, and it takes about 8 months to order. So I think I don't know if we would have been successful, and then we would have spent time and money working on that zoning amendment while we're paying interest on our loan to buy the land. So I don't know if that, and I don't know if it would have worked. And then we would have had to
Yeah.
gone over another year and a half of going through the process again.
Lori,
Sure.
I think your question might better be directed towards the people who more directly represent the governments than someone
Sure.
like Stan who's representing an applicant. It shouldn't be the cost of modifying the zoning ordinance should be a public cost, not a private cost. And the time also, you want to have something in place before someone like Stan shows up at the counter and wants something. I'm all for having
Exactly.
a procedure that's already in place that people can follow, as opposed to doing things ad hoc. And
But I think
I
that's
think the
also
planner's role is to set up systems that work for the benefit of their community. And what the work that Stan does shouldn't be impeded. It should be anticipated,
Yeah.
right?
But and I think
Yeah,
to
I
your
would
point,
agree.
Lori, I mean, I think that's why the states were stepping in, and or at least one state stepped in and said, "No, it doesn't matter what your land use says; it's approval. You're going to administratively approve this." And
Yeah,
so, and I think that to your point,
yeah. Well, we don't like
Yeah.
to. I think planners typically work for local governments. They
yeah,
don't like to be preempted. So that's my
no, not at
perspective.
all,
No, I
not at
mean,
all.
I talk to people in the uh, government still, and I was working for Cape Coral when Live Local came in and everything, and we had some issues with it. And our city manager personally spoke to the past president of the not president, yeah, the past president of the Florida Senate, Kathleen Pasadomo, and she was spearheading that bill, and she was one of the people right behind it and helped write it and so forth. And she said, "I'm sick and tired of people complaining about the fact they don't have enough land, uh, or they can't find places to build affordable housing, the NIMBY factor, and so forth. Look at all this vacant commercial we have." So they tinkered with it, and we gave input and so forth. And some planners hate it, some planners love it because it's it's you're drawing down that number of your housing need in your community for affordable housing. By the same token, local planners, as Steve alluded to, are being told what to do. And local government officials, elected, hate that too, state interference. But I think the jury is still out on it. I'm seeing a lot of developments here in the Fort Myers area, taking advantage of that, and we'll see what happens in the next 4 to 5 years. I was thinking about that as we were talking, and then when Steve commented, and then even Laura's question, I want to just maybe dovetail on that and see if you have any information on it. I read an article in the Urban Institute newsletter recently that talked about opportunity zones, I guess kind of making a comeback. And I didn't know it. I wasn't following it then. But 9 years ago, in Trump's first term, there was language in there to expand the function or what they could do in opportunity zones. And apparently nothing was done in this area, in this specific area. And I don't have all the factors or criteria and so forth. But now I heard that HUD is trying to push that now. Have you heard anything about that? Is there going to be some kind of a housing incentive there?
It's a capital gains tax dodge, right? So if you get capital gains from you sell a shopping center and you have $3 million in capital gains, if you invest in one of these opportunity zones, then you get a 7-year deferral.
Okay.
And when it's owed, you owe 85% of what you would have owed otherwise. And also, any capital gains you earn by your investment in the opportunity zone is tax-free. The challenge with moving it toward housing is that most of the housing, affordable rental housing that's being built has a 50-year, 50 affordability period. And there's no capital gains. It's not a cash flow play. It is a fee play. So there's no capital gains from it. So there's a real disconnect between using it for housing. So they're trying to push it for housing, but the main advantage of it is the capital gains you earn in the opportunity zone is tax exempt, and you're not earning capital gains in 7 years off of an affordable housing development.
Okay, so it's not really.
So it's not. So as designed, it's not going to be effective yet.
Not going to be effective.
And which is frustrating, but it's also, this administration increased the amount of tax credits by 12%. So states have more tax credits they can allocate to projects, but at the same time decreased the corporate tax rate. So as a result, we have less demand. So we've watched the price for tax credits drop because we've increased supply and decreased the demand.
Okay.
So when I was developer 2015, 16, and when I've been working around this forever, before the last crash, the prices were 99 cents on the dollar and sometimes higher than a dollar for dollar on the tax credits. Now they're down to 83 cents nationwide. So the amount of the subsidy that people are willing to pay for tax credits has dropped as their corporate tax rate has dropped.
I see. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we're timed out.
I think we're timed out. And again, thank you, Stan, very much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Great meeting y'all.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't. Maybe we can arrange something, later in the year. But really appreciate you taking the time. Great program, and Stan let me know before the program started when we were online talking that he'll send us his PowerPoint so we can share that with our board and any members that need it. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vince.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.